Have you watched this one? If so, congratulations. We can move on. If you haven't, it's okay. You can watch it later. Anyway, let's jump straight into the video. In the first Lostbelt, we are given a flashback of Anastasia's last moments in her life. Anastasia is the one who is indirectly responsible for the destruction of Chaldea. Kadok's servant, who is the main antagonist in this chapter. One day, Kadok saw a glimpse of Anastasia's life in his dream, just like a master dreaming of his servant's past. The dream showed the last moments of Anastasia, who was still conscious even after she was burned and buried by the soldiers. During this time, she was able to make a contract with V, a mysterious being that only a few members of the Romanova family could see, which she utilized to ensure that none of the soldiers who killed her would have a peaceful moment in their lives. The blood-colored message cue, "I am watching," appears in the background, followed by a screen filled with the word "watching." This gives the readers goosebumps as they come to know how cruel the case of Anastasia's death was. The next event happened in China. After we killed all the wolfmen and all the children in Russia and Scandinavia, we reached Lostbelt 3. After a few things happened, Koyanskaya was caught and put in prison. At first, seeing Koyanskaya locked up in a cell, stripped of her powers, might give a little satisfaction considering how much trouble she has caused you. But then Qin Shi Huang, the king of Lostbelt 3, summons mechanical puppets and orders them to drill non-lethal holes in her body so that she can be sealed away. You'll see Koyanskaya screaming in agony with little splatters of blood on the screen. What makes this scene even more gruesome is that the loud screeching sound of the drill in the background keeps playing while all this is happening. Next, we go to India, the place where Arjuna reigns as an omnipotent god who acts brazenly. The main premise of God Arjuna's interpretation of the Yuga cycle seen in the fourth Lostbelt story makes it a natural fit in the cosmic horror story genre. The first 7 days were paradise, with the exception of the occasional plague or Kali. Then, just 3 days later, buildings began to fall apart. The land became arid, and Kali began to swarm and attack villages, while the human population retreated into their homes, desperately praying to Arjuna for their survival. Yep, the Yuga cycle begins just 10 days apart. What was even worse was that there seemed to be a mental effect of this cycle on humans. During the 7 days of peace, they were generous and kind, but by the time of the last 3 days, most of them had become colder and selfish, even towards the people they had shown kindness to the day before. But that wasn't the worst of it. At the end of the 3 days, God Arjuna destroyed the entire Lostbelt, broke everyone into data, and erased everything he deemed as evil. Anything he deemed flawed. For example, a dog whose broken leg meant it could no longer run. So in his eyes, it no longer had any value whatsoever, would be deemed as evil, regardless of any emotional attachment the owner had. Even worse, anything removed in this way will be forgotten by the rest of the residents, even if they are very close to the removed entity. And even more worse, the removal leaves logical holes in people's memories. So if a parent is removed, their child will at least know that they should have a mother, but not understand why they don't have a mother. After leaving India, we went to Atlantis. During the intro to Lostbelt 5 Atlantis, we are introduced to Subject E, an alien life form that crash-landed onto Earth, specifically in Area 51. The nightmare fuel isn't from the subject itself, but rather the sheer hell it went through. At first, the Air Force preserved Subject E as it was critically injured and close to dying. But over time, as the narrator says, it didn't take long for the surgical procedures meant to resuscitate the subject to morph into brutally exploitative experiments. Some of these wonderful procedures ranged from trying to burn, melt, and freeze Subject E to stirring its intestines around and cutting off parts of its body. All while Subject E was still alive and conscious. At some point, the researchers realized that throughout all of this, Subject E was transmitting a constant signal, aka a cry for help. Guess what their rationale and response was? Keep torturing Subject E in the hopes that even more subjects can be captured. Okay, now we get to the crazy part. Lostbelt 6 is a place where things are much crazier than the worlds we've already been through. It's mentioned that Beryl's Lostbelt became so twisted that he ultimately tricked the inhabitants into cutting down the Tree of Emptiness. Except, something is keeping it sustained. Out of context, it seems like the most innocent looking of the lot, and resembles a generic fantasy with dwarves, elves, beastmen, and fairies walking around in the modern day as if nothing was out of the ordinary. Oh? Where are the humans, you ask? Simple, they're the food supply for the other races. The protagonist and Tristan wander into a village after losing their memories, thanks to getting lost in a cursed forest. And the villagers happily offer them a meal and shelter, only for one of them to give the game away because he's salivating so hard at the thought of wild game that he tries to dismember them on the spot. Nobody else, except for an outcast fairy, sees anything remotely wrong with this. Wait! In this Lostbelt, there are so many disturbing activities that I have to include. But I don't want you to get bored with this video, so I plan to make part 3, which contains most of Lostbelt 6. But there is one nightmare fuel that I want to describe in this part 2 video, and that is Morgan's ultimate defeat. Aurora tricks Woodwose into thinking that she has betrayed him, causing an uprising of the Fae against her. Then Spriggan forces Morgan to surrender by revealing he has her daughter, Baoban Sith, or Fae Knight Tristan, hostage, which leaves her open to an absolutely horrific and brutal beating from the Fae. Poor Morgan can only weakly beg to return to her throne as she's savagely beaten to death. What about Baoban Sith? Oh, she wasn't a hostage, she was already nearly dead. The traitors were carrying her rotting, barely alive body and made her watch them kill her adoptive mother before throwing her into the great pit like trash. So Morgan let herself be killed for nothing. Gosh, remembering this again makes me angry at those fairies in the Lostbelt. Now hit subscribe or you'll be haunted by V and Anastasia.